Welcome to Advanced Insights, where we provide just what the show name suggests. Advanced insights into some of the most exciting trends and topics in technology. I'm Mark Papermaster, CTO and EVP at AMD. On this episode, we step into the world of drug discovery, where processes are incredibly time-consuming, costly, and complex. I'm joined on the show today by Sean McLean. Sean is the founder and CEO of Absci. Sean scaled Absci from a basement lab to 160 plus employees. The company developed an internal portfolio of AI-discovered drug pipeline programs, including the ABS-101, an antibody being tested for the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease, and ABS-201, an antibody being tested for the treatment of androgenic alopecia. Sean, it is so great to have you on our podcast here, our show, and to be able to talk about drug discovery, which is not an area that a lot of our listeners are familiar with, and particularly, how AI is impacting your area of expertise and where your startup is focused on really changing the world with drug discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark, for having us here. And we're really excited about the impact that AI is going to have on healthcare. And in particular, drug discovery over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, I think where we ought to start, I do think it's a new area for our audience. And so one of the things I've gotten to know you as we've worked with you from an AMD side, it really gave me an appreciation of how hard this is. One, you have the whole ideation, like what can make a difference. But once you have an incredible idea, I was shocked to find out what it takes to go from that whole discovery process to even test it. Could you share with us a little bit of that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. Being a drug hunter in biotech is definitely not for the faint of heart. You have to have a lot of resilience to be able to overcome the challenges that you have. And so let's just start off with drug discovery. So you have a couple phases. So first you identify the target that you want to go after for a particular disease. Once you have that target identified, then you have to figure out how do you actually drug that particular target? And there's a lot of different modalities that you can drug with, such as small molecules, like a pill in the bottle. Yeah. Or you have, in our case, an antibody that you work on, which I'm sure listeners here are familiar with some of the antibody-based COVID drugs that had come out. And then ultimately, you have to go into IND-enabling studies, and then you submit what's called an IND to the regulatory agencies such as the FDA to get the drug approved to go into trials. That takes 5.5 years on average just to get a drug into humans.
Wow.
To a trial, yes. 5.5 years. And then to get a drug approved, you're talking anywhere from 8 to 10 years on average to go through all the clinical trials and have a drug approved. So you're talking 15 plus years.
Wow.
From start to finish. And the success rate is extremely low, 5% on average. And so this is why this industry and what we're working on is really ripe for disruption, and why we believe AI can have a tremendous impact in drug discovery and development.
And Sean, you launched a startup, about a decade ago, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So when I think about, and I go back a decade, that's just when AI was, really starting to show its promise, and in terms of acceleration. Was that the impetus for starting the company, or was it serendipitous?
We started off as a data first company, and we still are a data first company. We developed a technology that was able to scale protein-protein interaction. So essentially how antibodies interact with the target of interest, essentially the drug functionality. We were able to scale that drug functionality from, testing, hundreds of drugs in the wet lab to being able to scale that up to millions. And that was right around the time deep learning was taking off in 2018 at Google and with the Transformer. And it was this idea of taking this data along with these generative AI models to go from this paradigm in R&D where it's this trial and error process, where you're essentially searching for a needle in the haystack, to now being able to actually create that needle, and in our case, an antibody. So it's unlocking the design of antibodies so you can actually go and test hypotheses that you haven't been able to test before. This translates into the ability to go after what we like to call in the industry as these undruggable targets, or these targets that have been difficult to drug in the past, where you have known biology, but we just haven't been able to find that right drug. And we can now use these AI models to find the right drug for that target, and that enables you to actually start to create cures for diseases that have yet to be solved. That's what we're most excited about. Obviously, there's the importance of decreasing the time and cost, but we ultimately want to increase that probability of success, and we want to use AI to solve these really, really challenging problems in biology that still exist.
So let's sort of tease that apart a little bit. So you think about a data-driven approach, but the number of variables you have that you're dealing with that can affect it if you have an effective treatment is got to be immense.
There's a stat that I like to bring up. There's more sequence variants or drugs that you could create with an antibody than there are atoms in the universe. That's enormous. That's why AI has such a perfect application here, because of all the different permutations and drugs you could create from one antibody.
So that brings us exactly where I was going, is like, yes, it's serendipitous that deep learning really started showing these advances, but it just seems to me like without it, you'd have been mired in that data. And it would be great to hear, how you started marshaling AI. I mean, it's probably an expertise you had to build up, and the role of computation had to play in. When you're swimming in that much data, I'm sure it was algorithm and computation that had to come together.
I think one of the things that's led to the success that we've had at Absci is what we like to call the wet lab in a loop. Where we're essentially able to leverage concepts like reinforcement learning, where you're able to generate this data in the wet lab. You're able to train your models, and then you're able to then validate how effective the drugs are coming out of your model. Normally, that would take years just to go through one iterative cycle. We can do that in 6 weeks. And that's what's allowed us to rapidly iterate on our model architectures, which hyperparameters are we using, and ultimately to be able to increase the overall accuracy of our models. And so that original technology, we had developed in a basement lab 13 years ago, has been absolutely pivotal in getting the models to where they're at today. And we all know, and the data is the most critical piece for the overall accuracy of these models. And again, I think having that data first mentality and having kind of that wet lab in the loop has really led to the success that we've had in being able to create these AI models where we can now go after some of these hard challenging diseases.
I'd love just sort of exploring your process of how to take this overwhelming amount of data and then marshal it to accelerate drug discovery. So when you think about developing a model, that's an expertise you had to build up, and then there's algorithms. So along came Gen AI and new approaches there. Tell us a little bit about the two aspects of the model development and then the actual algorithms, just at a high level, how those have progressed, and how you're sort of assessing the impact of changes you make in terms of really speeding discovery.
Yeah, so let's dive into our de novo design model. It's a diffusion-based model. And how this model works is you take a target of interest, and you take the structure of this target, and you can either experimentally drive that through experimental techniques like cryo-EM or X-ray crystallography, or you can use computational approaches like AlphaFold. Okay. And you take that structure and you feed that into the model. That's the input. Mm-hmm. And then you condition the model on the area of the target that you want the antibody to bind to. And then that's called the epitope.
If I can interrupt, so an analogy people might have is you mentioned COVID earlier. So that's exactly what and our mRDNA has to do. It has to target.
Absolutely. So in that case, we would be taking the spike protein and feeding that into the model for the COVID example. And so we take that spike protein, and then we would tell the model to design an antibody that bound to a particular region of that spike protein. And you can kind of think of an antibody almost having 6 different fingers, and these fingers are what ultimately grab on to the target of interest, and these are called CDRs. There's 6 of them, and that's ultimately what the model is predicting is what 6 CDRs should it design to bind to that particular location on that given target. And that's ultimately what the output of the model is those 6 CDRs. And then we go into the wet lab and test those. I think a perfect example of this is a program we've been working on with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, along with Caltech. And this is going after HIV. And so the researchers at Caltech, Dr. Steve Mayo and Pamela Borkman, had discovered this region in the HIV virus called the Caldera region. It's this very, very deep crevice on the HIV virus that is highly conserved across all different clades or strains of HIV. But the issue that the field has faced was actually drugging that region because it was so deep. Hence the name, the Caldera region. Again, this deep crevice. No one had been able to drug it because of how it was positioned on the HIV virus. And we were able to take that Caldera region and feed that into the model. And the model was able to design an HCDR3, one of the most kind of important CDRs or fingers that bind to the target, and was able to basically design this very, very long CDR to go into that deep crevice and bind to it. And this was the first time anybody had actually drugged the Caldera region. This could potentially lead to a neutralizing antibody across all the different strains of HIV. The first time anybody has ever done this before. This is why we do what we do. Obviously, lowering the cost and getting things into the clinic much faster is really important. But being able to unlock new novel biology, that's what it's all about, because that translates into cures for patients.
And Sean, without the diffusion model approach that you had to really be able to find the structure that could bind to the deep crevice, could it have been done, or would it have just taken much longer period of time? Give us some relative scale of how the algorithmic and model approach you took sped the discovery.
Yeah, so I mean, this Caldera region has been, was discovered years ago, and we have tried various different approaches. Whether it was an immunization approach, you take this Caldera region and you inject it into a mouse, and the mouse uses its immune system to generate an antibody. That wasn't successful. They had used classical screening techniques in the wet lab. Those weren't successful. And so it's been years of scientists, trying to solve this problem. And who knows if, 10 years from now, if it, still would have been solved. We don't know, but we were able to use AI to actually solve that problem immediately. These are examples of where we're using AI to go after these undruggable targets and ultimately, cure these potential diseases.
Well, I just find it fascinating, and I think for all of our listeners, it's going to give us just tremendous hope in terms of what's yet to come. But I want to pivot a little bit. Obviously, our focus at AMD is the enabling engines, the computation underneath. And Sean, when you look at what we've been doing with AMD, it's focusing on high performance solutions across our portfolio. So we've had great growth in high performance computing and across CPUs, GPUs. We power the number one supercomputer in the world. And this area of drug discovery is a huge focus. We've had some progress, particularly with genome analysis. We actually teams working on the supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Lab made some incredible associations genome and phenomes to actually, speed ways of personalized medicine. And I would love to bring this to our partnership of AMD and Absci. I look at it as we know how to accelerate computation, but we don't know specific areas. So like when we create a partnership with your company, I like to think of it as, just a brainstorm of we're sharing with you technology. How can we bring our computation technology help? You're the expert on speeding drug discovery. Maybe just talk a little bit about how that's gone. I mean, you had to shift from our competitor platform arm to AMD. How did that go? And just the role that you see of computation in your needs going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, we're really excited about the partnership with AMD, and we ended up, entering into this partnership for two reasons. One was the technical aspect, and then the other was the cultural. And so, diving into the technical aspect, if you look at your chips, you have some of the best memory capacity out there, and that is really important for the application of antibody design. And the reason why this is important is because it enables us to have increased training resolution. The models are trained on the structure of proteins, but with lower memory chips, we're only able to train a fraction of that protein. And with the higher memory chips that you all offer, we're able to actually train on the whole protein, which means that we're giving the model more context, which means more information, which means that you get higher accurate models. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, increasing overall batch or being able to do more batch processing on your chips because of the higher memory. And that's ultimately leading to more efficient compute utilization, which we believe is going to drive down our overall compute usage.
But you're getting more throughput. It'd be great if you could tell us, what does that really mean? I mean, when you think about your goals and you're driving the team, how does that technology translate to impact for your company?
The more accurate the models are, the more generalizable these models are able to become. And the more generalizable they are, the more targets we can work on and ultimately be successful in designing these drugs, again, towards these undruggable targets. Being able to solve these hard challenges within biology. And some recent stats that we have on how compute is really accelerating and how AI is accelerating the timelines and cost. If you look at our first drug we've developed with our AI models, we were able to get this asset into the clinic in roughly 24 months. Again,
versus 5 years.
Yes, 5 years. So roughly, we were able to bring that down in half, and we're continuing to see that timeline decrease. Large pharma normally spends $50 to $100 million on getting a drug into the clinic. We were able with this with ABS 101, we were able to get that into the clinic with an investment of roughly $13 to $15 million. And so with the same amount of capital, we're now able to get more shots on goal.
That's what I don't think people quite understand about the role of technology can play and how science broadly and more specifically drug discovery. I mean, what you just described is completely disruptive. It's a complete game changer in terms of what we've historically seen. I have to believe that the approaches you're taking at Absci, this now is going to become like the new mode of operation for drug discovery. Is the entire industry starting to adopt these same type of approaches?
You're not only seeing startups like us adopt this, but you're seeing large pharma adopt this as well. And those that are leading the pack are those that have the wet lab in the loop that I was talking about, being able to generate data to train your model and then using that for validation. And if you look at the companies like OpenAI that have this massive data set, the internet. We don't have this in biology, and so there's certain aspects of biology where we just don't have the data, and I think that's a big area of focus for us in the future, is figuring out how we build new technologies to generate more data to ultimately again increase probability of success and drive these costs down. But 100%. The industry sees this as very critical. Like, AI is here to stay, and it is not leaving within biotech. And it's a really, really exciting time. I mean, I see AI having the biggest impact on healthcare and this industry, and it's going to be really exciting to see what happens over the next 5+ years.
So I imagine that's an area that we should all watch, is how you're actually training those models. Is it all done in the wet labs, or do you see any synthetic data generation that could be applicable in drug discovery?
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring up the synthetic data. That's actually a big focus of ours in the future. And it's actually looking at how we can utilize molecular dynamic simulation to generate the synthetic data. And so you'd have essentially kind of three components. You have the sequence-based data, or the affinity-based data from the wet lab that we're generating. You have the structure-based data that's open source, and then you have the synthetic data that's coming from these MD simulations. And we see this as a big component for, again, increasing the accuracy of our models. And those MD simulations are very compute intensive. And so that's an area that we're excited to be working with you all on, is how do we scale MD simulation for this synthetic data generation of these models. But that's definitely a big focus of ours in the future. And I think something we're really excited to work with you all on.
Sean, perfect segue to sort of last kind of topic I really wanted to cover with you, and that is, what should AMD and all of us that are on the computation side of the industry, what are the areas that you feel are bottlenecks that could, if eliminated, really help speed your progress?
One of the areas, and we just touched on this, is actually the MD simulation. If we can figure out ways to decrease the overall compute spend, so we can scale that up, that'd be fantastic. Because right now, in some of these runs, we're having to use our full cluster to generate this data. And if we were able to scale that even more, we could get more of this synthetic data. And I think that's a big area. And I'm figuring out, like, again, how can we decrease the overall compute spend. But I think what we're seeing, like with DeepSeek, I think it's like showing us that we can figure out ways to decrease the overall cost, so we can focus on these applications that are very, very, very compute intensive, such as molecular dynamics. And so I think these are some of the ways that we're excited to be working with you all on to figure out how we can unlock these extremely compute intensive applications that are going to be important for us.
Yeah, some people call it a DeepSeek moment that occurred as they released both their R1 and their V3 model, because they applied some different approaches, allowed some of the same accuracies and capabilities to be done with less computation. And we've certainly embraced that at AMD. It ran day zero on our MI300, and actually since it came out, we've tuned, and we've made actually tremendous performance. And what I think is interesting is, again, it's a moment, because the whole industry is now saying, well, how can we go even further than DeepSeek did? So it's spawning a whole, I'll say, inflection of yet further compute efficiencies for AI exploration. So I think that's a harbinger of what's yet to come. And of course, we're not going to slow down at AMD. And as the general purpose processor that we are, that we're architected to handle changes in algorithms and new approaches and make that more facile. Assuming you have yet more the kind of compute capabilities you need, give us some insight as to where you see over the next, let's call it, 5 to 10 years. It is a long window of getting new drugs out to market, but our listeners would love to know what's going to be the impact of this combination of new approaches like Absci is applying, yet with the kind of computation and algorithmic capabilities of AI?
The vision that I see with the intersection of AI and biology is in 5+ years living in this world where we can take a patient sample and be able to have AI models find the target that's relevant for that particular disease for that patient, and then use these AI algorithms to then design the drug for that target and be able to have personalized medicine for that individual patient. That's where I see this going. And I see the success rate increasing, and ultimately the cost of healthcare dramatically decreasing because of the AI advancements that we're having together, and that this whole industry is working on.
Sean, that it's so inspiring because you think about what you're describing, which is truly having the capability to personalize medicine. Most of what's called personalized medicine today is for, I'll say, a category. Like, oh, you fit into this category. We have personalized approach for you. But it's not actually looking at your genome and your, what antibodies could really be specifically more effective for you as an individual.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're describing is just that level of personalization, individual.
Absolutely, and it's going to take all of us to get here. It's going to take companies that are focused on drug discovery, on development. It's going to take companies like AMD, and then also to the regulatory agencies to allow this to happen. But everyone wants this to occur. Everyone wants to live in this future. And I like to say biotech is very much a team sport, and it's going to take all of us to get there. And that's why we're excited about this collaboration with you and AMD to really be able to usher in this new paradigm within biotech and healthcare.
Well, I am incredibly inspired by that vision that you have. I mean, we're incredibly motivated. Thank you for such a great partnership with AMD, and we look forward to making what you just shared as a vision over the next 5 years to become a reality.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for having me on today. And we're really excited about this partnership.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean.
Awesome.
I truly enjoyed chatting with Sean. The main takeaways from our discussion is that the drug discovery process is ripe for disruption. With an inspiring work leveraging AI that's happening at Absci, instead of just searching for the needle in the haystack, they can create that needle in the form of an antibody, saving time, money, and really speeding to incredibly disruptive drug treatment programs. Thank you for joining us today on Advanced Insights. I look forward to bringing you more in-depth conversations on cutting-edge technology, industry insights, and visionary perspectives from some of the brightest minds in the field. You can watch the video show on AMD's YouTube channel, or you can listen on Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music audio-only platforms. Technology is always advancing, and I can't wait to share with you more insights next time.